Chapter 2. It was after dark when Woody heard the kitchen door slam. He was in the den watching television, bored. Tony bounced in with a big smile and said, "Hey kid, what are you doing?" "Nothing. Where have you been?" "Hanging out." "Any word from Mom?" "No. She works till 10 on Tuesdays." Tony fell into the sofa and kicked off his sneakers. "What are you watching?" "Clint Eastwood, an old western." "You watch the weirdest stuff. Have you had dinner?" "There's nothing to eat. I've already checked." "Look, I gotta deliver some pizzas tonight. Why don't you come with me and we'll grab one on the run?" A pizza sounded like a good idea, though they ate a lot of them. Tony worked for a few hours a week delivering for a popular pizza joint called Santo's, and he usually managed to grab a few leftover slices for himself and Woody. Often he managed to steal an entire Supreme. "All right," Woody said without moving. Tony bounced off the sofa, went into his room, and returned seconds later wearing his red Santos polo and matching red cap. Woody turned off the television and the lights, and they left the house. Tony drove a small Toyota pickup with 1,000,000 miles on it, a hand-me-down from their stepfather. It wasn't much for a ride, and the girls weren't too impressed with it, but for the time being, it was all they had. 10 minutes later, they pulled into the parking lot of a strip mall, and Tony parked as far away from Santos as possible. "Keep down," he said as he got out. I know," Woody said as he slid low in the seat. Santos had a no riders policy, and the boss was strict about it. While making deliveries, any driver caught with a passenger could be fired on the spot. Tony disappeared into the restaurant, and Woody began the waiting. Peeking out of the window, he watched college students spill out of their cars and enter Santos. Cute girls, cool guys, nice cars. Woody wondered if he would ever make it to college. He was having doubts, though at the age of 13, he really wasn't too concerned about it. In his gang, only Theo and perhaps one or two others had their futures planned. Woody was leaning towards a career as a fireman, and he wasn't sure if college was necessary. His phone pinged with a text from his mother. "Have you seen Tony? What are you having for dinner?" Woody responded, "We are fine. Pizza. You good?" "Okay, but may work until 11. Okay with that?" "Sure." "Homework done?" "Of course." He asked about his homework only because he was expected to. The truth was Daisy was too tired to monitor her son's progress in school. She knew Tony was skipping a lot because the school called her, and they were fighting about it, but Tony was winning because his mother simply didn't have the energy to keep up with him. Things were not going well with her current husband. She was worrying a lot and losing sleep. Daisy was always tired and frazzled, and Woody was concerned. With her earnings from 2 part-time jobs, plus what little her husband kicked in, the family was barely staying afloat. How was Woody supposed to dream of college? It was easy for someone like Theo, with 2 parents who were lawyers and seemed to be happily married. Plus, Theo was an only child. He had been Woody's loyal friend for many years, and would always be. But at times, Woody secretly admitted to himself that he was envious of Theo. Tony walked out with the bright red magnetic Santos sign and affixed it to the top of the Toyota. "Should be only a few minutes," he said, and went back inside. Woody said nothing. 10 minutes later, Tony was back with 4 large pizza boxes, which he had placed on the bench seat between them. They smelled delicious, and Woody was suddenly starving. When they were on the street, Tony said, "Open the top one and let's have dinner. Sausage and mushrooms." Woody opened the box, handed a slice to Tony, and took one for himself. They ate in silence as Tony zipped through narrow streets around the college, driving, as always, much too fast. The first stop was a run-down duplex with cars scattered in the front yard. Tony checked the address, parked in the street, and hustled to the front door with a large pizza. He was back in seconds and grumbling, "Kid gave me $1. A $12 pizza and a Mr. Big Spender tipped me only $1. College kids." They sped away and stopped 2 blocks over the over at another student dump, another $1 tip. But they were having fun, cutting through the maze of streets around Stratton College, listening to loud music on the radio, eating dinner, and griping about how cheap students were. When the last pizza was delivered, Tony raced back to Santa's for another load. The restaurant was packed and the delivery phone rang nonstop. It was dinner time and the students were hungry. They squealed tires and took off again, with a rack of warm pizzas between them. Tuesdays were normally slow, but Santos was shrewdly offering a 2-for-1 special, and business was brisk. For 2 hours, Tony and Woody wheeled around the western section of Strattonburg, delivering mostly to students, but to some nicer homes as well. When things slowed around 9, Tony had collected $27 in tips and was proud of himself. He gave Woody a $5 bill and said he would give his mother a 10, but Woody doubted that. They stopped for gas at a convenience store at the edge of town. Someone called Tony's name, and a friend named Garth walked over as he left the store. Tony was pumping gas, and Woody couldn't hear at all of the conversation, but he did hear Garth say, "Let's go cruising. Got some beer and a tank full of gas." Garth drove a muscled-up green Mustang with wide wheels and loud mufflers, and he was known to speed around town. He wasn't a bad kid. In fact, he was quite popular and dated one of the cutest girls Woody had ever seen. But there was something about Garth that Woody didn't like. He had the look of a guy who might break bad at any minute and do something stupid. He was 18, a year older than Tony, but still too young to buy beer. And the fact that he had some was a bad sign. Tony finished pumping and parked the truck beside the store. "You going with us?" he asked Woody. "What am I supposed to do, walk home?" "Let's go. We'll just cruise around for a while and get home before Mom." The smart voice in Woody's head said no. Do not get in the car with Garth and Tony and cruise around the college while drinking beer. Nothing good can happen. And the not-so-smart voice said, "Oh, go ahead. It's harmless fun. How many 13-year-olds get to hang out with the older guys?" "Are you coming with us?" Tony snapped at him, but it was more than a question. It was a challenge. What Tony was really asking was, "Are you going to chicken out and go home or wait for Mommy?" Woody didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. "I'm coming," he said, and shrugged as if he could run with the big dudes any night of the week. He crawled into the back seat of the Mustang as Garth gunned the engine. The car roared and fishtailed out of the parking lot. "Give me a beer," Garth said over his shoulder as he darted through traffic. Woody saw a 6-pack of cans in the seat next to him. He pulled off 2 and handed them to Tony, who said, "You can have one." It was another challenge. Garth was watching in the rearview mirror and asked, "How old are you, Woody?" 13. "Ever had beer?" "Sure. We've had a few together," Tony said, sneaking them from the fridge when no one's home. There was one massive, gigantic problem with the car with them. Woody could feel it, almost touch it as if they were seated next to him, and he came very close to simply blurting it out just to hear his conscience. Tony was on probation. 4 months earlier, he had been arrested for possession of pot, which was bad enough, but he also had been charged with intent to sell. He got an incredibly lucky break when the 2 narcotics officers who nailed him collapsed. One was fired for stealing drugs. The other fled town and had not been seen. The evidence disappeared along with the policeman, and for a few weeks Tony was the luckiest kid in Strattonburg. He agreed to plead guilty to a lesser charge of underage possession and got off light with 6 months probation. He spent only 1 night in jail and considered the entire episode a joke. It did not faze him, and he continued slipping through the cracks at school. If he had got caught with beer, it would be a violation of his probation and would likely spend a few nights in the slammer. But Tony wasn't worried about anything these days. He was 17, going to school when he pleased, and enjoying the life of a future high school dropout. "I had my first beer when I was 10 years old," Garth said proudly. My crazy uncle gave it to me. He's in prison, you know. Go ahead, Woody, help yourself. The truth was, Woody had tasted beer a few times, always in an effort to be cool in front of Tony, but couldn't stand the taste of it. After years of watching beer commercials in which young and beautiful and athletic people lived the good life with a cold beer in hand, he was shocked at how awful it tasted. He mentioned this to Tony, who promised him that with enough practice, he would grow to enjoy it. Garth, still glancing back, said, Come on, kid, pop a top. Woody pulled off a beer, popped it, and took a sip, and tried to look as if he really enjoyed it, but wanted to spit it out. He managed to choke it down with a frown, then gritted his teeth and took another swallow, then another. The taste did not improve. I think he likes it, Garth said between gulps. If you only knew, Woody said to himself. Tony and Garth enjoyed their drinks far more than Woody, and within minutes were tossing back their empties and demanding more. Woody handed them their seconds and took another sip. He began to get lightheaded, and this helped with the bad taste. He finally finished his first can and popped the top to his second. Attaboy, Garth said without turning around. They turned into a parking lot around a large mall and circled it until they approached a Cineplex. There's his car, Tony said, as if he really didn't want to meet whoever owned a car. It was parked with several others, all jacked up muscle cars, all with tough guys leaning on the fenders and smoking cigarettes. Garth parked close by and turned off his ignition. Let's get it over with. Stay here, Tony said to Woody as he got out. No problem, Woody thought. He watched Garth and Tony approach the other guys, say hello, shake hands in a variety of ways, and light up their own cigarettes. Nobody was holding a beer or a drink. A police car eased by not far away. The boys waved. The cops waved back. Everybody was behaving. Woody kept low in the back seat, barely peeking through the window. The boys laughed and bantered back and forth. Then the conversations grew serious. Both Garth and Tony reached into their pockets, took out money, and handed it over to a bearded guy who looked a few years older. He gave them nothing in return. Woody doubted that neither his brother nor Garth could be stupid enough to buy pot on such an open area that was patrolled by police. There were probably cameras everywhere. Still, the transaction, whatever it was, had the look of something shady. When they returned to the car, Woody asked, Who was that guy with the beard? Garth started the car and began to ease away. Tony said nothing. Woody asked again, Who was that guy with the beard? Tony said, An old friend. But it was obvious the guy was not an old friend, and Tony just wanted his little brother to shut up. No one spoke for a few minutes as Garth drove along the main street, going nowhere in particular. Finally, he said, I need some more beer. The six-pack was gone. Each had consumed 2 cans. I'm broke. You got any cash left? Garth asked Tony. No, I gave it all to him. What? Woody asked. How can you be broke? You had over $20 a while ago. Tony turned around and glared at his little brother. That guy back there is a friend of ours. He's a bookie at college, hands out bets on football games. We owed him some money. No big deal. Sometimes you win, sometimes you'll lose. How about loaning me that $5 I just gave you? I don't think so. Woody wanted to say something about the gambling, which, of course, was also against the law and would be another violation of Tony's probation. Forget it, Garth said. We're not taking the money from the kid. He braked hard and pulled into a shopping center. All the stores were closed, but a well-lit ATM machine was waiting. Garth parked, left the engine running, walked to the machine, looked around nervously as if robbing a bank, and began punching numbers. He punched and punched without success. He stomped away, returning to the car and said, I guess my mom's frozen my account again. I really want a beer. They sped away with the Mustang burning rubber. The convenience store was on the edge of town on a 2-lane road with little traffic. The parking lot was gravel, and the front windows were covered with thick bars. 2 pumps offered gasoline, but there were no other customers at the moment. Garth parked and said, "I know this guy. Be right back." "What's he doing?" Woody asked, almost in a whisper. "Don't worry about Garth. He knows everybody." They waited, but not long. Garth soon appeared, making a quick exit and holding an entire case of canned beer. He yanked open his door, tossed the beer into Woody's lap, jumped in, and shifted gears. The Mustang roared away from the store, spraying gravel all over the place. "Beers, please," Garth said, obviously proud of himself. Woody pulled off 2 cans and handed them to the front. He was finished for the night. "How'd you get the beer?" he asked when the store was out of sight. "Just told the guy I was thirsty, needed to borrow some beer." Garth popped the top and slugged his beer. "Come on," Tony said. The guy gives you credit. Garth smacked his lips and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. He reached into his left jeans pocket and pulled out something. It was a black pistol, shiny in the darkness. "This is instant credit all over town," Garth said with a laugh. He turned around quickly, aimed it at Woody's face, and pulled the trigger. A blast of warm water hit Woody in the eyes. His heart had stopped in a split second, and his mouth opened in horror. Garth roared in laughter as he turned his attention back to the highway. Tony was not amused and yelled, "What are you doing? You robbed that guy?" "Of course not," Garth said, still laughing. "You can't rob someone with a water pistol. I just borrowed some beer and some of his cash, and I'll go back tomorrow and pay the guy." "You took cash?" "Yeah," Tony yelled again in disbelief. Woody was too stunned to drink. Water was still dripping into his mouth, and he was in shock from being shot. But he quickly began to realize that the situation was a lot more serious than Garth was letting on. "You're crazy," Tony said. "You can't stick a gun in a guy's face. I don't care what kind of gun it is." "It's not a gun, it's a water pistol, and a very nice one at that. It's just having a little fun." "How much cash did you take?" "Not much. All he had. He emptied the drawer. I'd say a couple hundred." "Look, Garth, we're going home," Tony said angrily. "Take us back to my truck. You got that? I'm on probation, remember? A stupid trick like that will bring in the cops, and I'm heading to jail. I don't care what kind of gun you used. Take us back to my truck." "What? We just got some beer to drink, Tony. Don't freak out on me." "You're crazy. Come on, Tony. Don't go chicken on me." "It's not being chicken. It's being stupid. I don't want the beer, and I'm telling you right now we're getting out of here." All right. "You okay back there, Woody?" Tony asked. "Sure," Woody barely managed to say. He wanted to inform his older brother that he thought he was an idiot for getting in Garth's car to begin with, but he bit his tongue and avoided more trouble. They were back in the city near the college, and the highway had widened into a boulevard. They stopped at a red light, and the police car eased along them, so Garth left. His window was down. From the back seat, Woody heard the words he would never forget. A cop said loudly, "Stop right there, kid." Suddenly, there were blue lights everywhere. That's the end of chapter 2.